You are listening to The Critical Social Worker, a revolutionary storytelling podcast. I'm your host, Professor Ace, and with the support of the University of Alaska Fairbanks Department of Social Work, we gather voices of revolutionary social workers from around the world, organizers, healers, artists, and educators, people who carry stories that connect us, challenge us, and remind us what it means to be human. Each episode is an offering, a chance to slow down, listen deeply, and feel the ground beneath your feet. Come as you are, stay as long as you need, and remember, no matter your pain, somebody, somewhere feels the same. Welcome to The Circle. In episode 67, I was joined by Tiokasin Ghosthorse, Cheyenne River, Lakota Nation. Rather than speak about the earth, he speaks with it. This episode opens a different kind of listening, one that doesn't seek answers, but relationship. If you find something meaningful here, the best way that you can support this work is simple. Like, comment, share the episode, and subscribe to our channels. And if you want to connect, ask questions, or be a part of the conversation, please reach out, because I'd love to hear from you. Where are you joining us from today?
I'm in the Catskill Mountains in New York, upper state New York.
It's a pleasure to have you. I'm here in Honoka'a, which is up on the north shore of Big Island in Hawaii, and we should have an audience of students from all over the world, maybe most of them in Alaska. And I just wanted to open up this conversation by telling you about how me and my students became acquainted with you. I was teaching a substance abuse course this summer, and when we looked a little bit deeper, we saw that substance abuse isn't just an issue of someone using drugs or alcohol too much. It seems to be a representation of disconnection, and that the way to healing and recovery was through connection or reconnection to various things, whether it's to yourself, to culture, to land, to connection, to community. During our research, when we were looking for ideas related to reconnection, we came across that documentary, The Eternal Song, and we ended up writing a paper where we featured you prominently. And so I just want to say thank you for the work that you do. And I wonder if you might just tell us a little bit about the documentary and how that came about.
Well, the directors Mauricio and Zaya Benazzo. I got to know them by being a guest on their show, SAND. It's Science and Non-Duality, probably 7 years ago now. And we talked about non-duality. And they understood that mostly Native peoples, Indigenous peoples across the planet speak in non-duality. And it's not so linear, non-binary, as non-duality suggests. And out of that interview, they became more interested as I saw a lot of Indigenous peoples now being interviewed through their platform. And so they asked me if I would be willing to give some words or be filmed. So after a year or so, they showed up here and stayed for 2 to 3 weeks, and we were able to film what I said and played. Of course, there's much more to it. And we met, I think it was in November 2023, and was able to convey some messages. And I think their interest came from earnesty rather than curiosity. And that was very respectful to me. And I decided, yes, let's do this. So it came down to where it was intense 2 weeks with them, traveling to upper state New York, which is Albany, just talking through the differences in current civilization, modernity, and what modernity considers primitive or backward thinking or slow thinking, and grappling with that, the great difference between judgment and non-judgment, between a culture and civilization. And that was brought out very well. And then they had actually interviewed other Indigenous peoples, and then I was part of that, along with other people like Okomalafe, Pat McCabe, and others there. And we were able to convey the same messages without ever meeting each other. Now, I had known 2, 3 of the people that had guests, but most of them were new to me, and how they could not understand, well, they did, that all indigenous peoples have this backbone of reverence for earth, not the earth, earth as in first person. I think that thinking about distant language like the earth, that earth, it's always over there. It's not a part of us. So I brought that to light and started thinking about changing the language. I was already thinking about changing what I was trying to interpret from the languages of Lakota. Now, I would say languages of Lakota is there are regionally based Lakota. We speak in a general, but there are in this case reservation differences. So it's like kind of like lingo, but the meaning came out very, very strong, and less definition we had. So I think they let go of that, or able to understand meaning rather than the definition, which took away meaning. And that's the difference between the languages we speak. One is very objectified, subjectified, conflicting antagonism. The other is more open, more willing to listen because of its natural ability as Earth does. It's able to care, listen to all of us without basing judgment through color, hierarchy, or especially domination. In the Lakota, there's no word for domination or concept, just like there's no word for nature in many indigenous cultures. And trying to take Lakota and kind of squeezing it together and putting it in a language, the box of English, was impossible and still is. And it's a very small segment of, if anything, human understanding about being a human being. Because we are working with binary concepts, basically cannot go beyond that except in abstract form. And so when I got involved with the directors, it really moved me that they were speaking to indigenous peoples across the planet. We knew commonalities amongst all human beings, and especially amongst indigenous peoples. And it came to the differences, we respected that rather than shut them out mentality because they don't speak our language or not from here. So it got into a little political, a little creation stories, like there's no word for superstition. So all these ideas that we're supposed to speak a code switch language to standardize our language to English bothers today a lot of indigenous peoples because it's not a material world. So if you're talking about in the US, there's this thing called land back. And if you ask most Americans, they'll think about land itself, its material substance and the demarcation of borders, all this, property. But if you speak to a native person, we mean spiritual because the land holds all of us. We come from it. We language, songs, basically culture, health, free air, free health, free everything. So we think about land different. And so we see the land being misused through language. And I could probably explain about that a little later, but that's basically how we got involved in producing the land.
Yeah, that's incredible. And thank you for sharing. And you said that you all had the same message. What was that message?
To respect the earth, to revere earth, to consider earth a being, consider that in essence, Lakota wise man, in this case, Black Elk, said, the center of the universe is everywhere. So this is the approach that indigenous peoples have. We're all in relationship. Today we're being taught to connect, and connect is a technical word, although it's Latin to understand English, this true base, like 60 to 65% of English is Latin based. And the other parts of English comes from other cultures, or some say even plagiarized. And so that comes down to the behavior of a people. It's an extracting language. It extracts just about everything. And it's programmed to do that. And you find the generosity of Native people just as generous as Earth is to all life. So I think that's what that meaning is.
Yeah. Well, why don't we stay on the topic of language for a minute? I think there's a lot of different contexts out here in Hawaii. They outlawed the Hawaiian language in schools and everything until like the late 1970s. So there was that disruption we all know about Alaska and the continental United States, and the disruption through boarding schools and the punishment for culture and language and things like that. I have one of my mentors, his name is Dr. Amana Mbise, and he's from Tanzania in Africa. And he was describing to me that over there that the government is trying to disrupt all of I can't remember the number that he said, but there's several indigenous languages that exist throughout the country, quite a few of them, and that they're trying to disrupt them and get rid of them because they view it as divisive, and they're trying to get everybody to speak English and Swahili. And I think something that many of us don't recognize, and I didn't recognize for most of my life, is just how limiting the English language is as far as how we see the world. And even now, I try to change things, and it's very, very difficult for me. It's a very difficult process. And so, I was just wondering if you could reflect on that a little bit about language and as far as a way of seeing the world and not just speaking it.
My primary language is Lakota. Lakota, and to pronounce it correctly is a must to understand the language. Just like I briefly interrupted you, I said it's Tiokasin, but that's still not spoken correctly. I anglicized it and said Tiokasin, but the true word is Tiokasi, Tiokasi, and it means something, but that's the little story behind it. I've found of course, we could say duality, non-duality, but I found because we don't have the concept or word for domination, it's very important to see in relationship. If you have domination, you don't have relationship. The people are being dominated, or anything, even other plant life. They live in fear and confusion, and they follow the program in order to survive within the box. I call it the parabox, not the paradox, the parabox, because that's a very limited view of extraction and domination, where there's cause and effect, and then there's beginning and ending, and that involves time. And then there is the parabox. There is dominant, superior, and inferior. So you can imagine that as a box. And from that, to continue that process, you have to reach outside of the process of the box, and pull to give resource and food, if you will, of thinking, of living, of systems within the box. Because it always has to go out and conquer and own and steal and extract, and then find ways of denial that it's happening. And even the word guilt in the old Lakota, there wasn't the word guilt. So you have to really check your mind. We're still trying to, well, why isn't there a word for guilt? Because we're still in the box. We're still trying to form everything into the program that we understand. And we continue to do that, and everything becomes worldly, legally, physically, spiritually. Everything's outside, and nothing is going on inside. So we seek salvation to fill that void. And it's like owning a property. Now you're the king of this square acre, and it's the world. And so everything forms in basically a metaphorical concept. And we dream out of that. And we're told this is the way all humans are. And that involves imperialism and thinking that everybody should think Western, out of Greece, out of Greek history and Roman history and European history. And then you load that up on a chip, and you look at all the tragedies that happened in Europe through the languages, through belief systems, religion, wars, kings, queens, the beginning and ending stories, the tragedies. And he loaded that up from a people who were banned from grieving or mourning their dead 599 AD because the sword of religion was the terror, the allegiance to what God you believed in, made room for dogma, and that dogma came in and made sure everybody was thinking one, and mostly kings, they terrified people with religion and the sword and the finances. So you have a three-headed monster, and then most of the people then were, this history, were of the land. The people of the land were terrified, being afraid of being killed because they were earth people and they didn't believe in dogma or domination. Well, they were killed off, threatened, tortured, all that tragedy loaded on a ship of fear, ships of fear, looking for freedom or being free, a new way to believe according to them. And so they came over here with all those values of being terrified and trauma, and they unloaded it in the states. What you call the states is Turtle Island to us. So they brought those religions and laws here, and they laid it bare because those religions and laws, one thing that they didn't come with, I'm told by an elder, is they didn't come with land. They came with religion and laws. They applied those ways of domination to the land, and this is why the land suffers. The languages of indigenous peoples understood this. So in our way, we offered generosity, but we were treated very well. And they, like you tie up a dog, keep them in capture, they get very mean. And so today there's that stereotype about natives. We're all, talked about detrimentally. And then that was the domination of war and finances and religion. So you have all of those three things now controlling the world where people can't think anymore. They just believe. They only believe because if you believe, you don't need to think. And this is where the critical race theory is, downplayed or set aside. Don't speak that language because it talks about being these indigenous languages are talking from the experience of being a human being. In other words, we are not talking about the earth. We are talking from the earth. And it's just those little word twists that we can see. One makes sense. One is like the program. You learn about something in distance and you go to the next country, learn about that. Now you know something without ever experiencing it. It's like you can go to the library and gather all this information, but never have any experience with the information you gathered. That's today's present educational process, as well as religious, is, scientist. And that's what there. It's an assumption because you've been someplace and you visited and wrote a paper, you came back, you know everything. So it's all put into conceptual train cars, and that train gets longer and longer. The train has no brakes because they don't want to reach the ending, even though their ancestral DNA knows as an indigenous person who forgot how to be an indigenous person. Claims to be now because they went to a ceremony, they went to a vision quest, they take ayahuasca, they take all these things to want to be indigenous again, while at the same time pushing the indigeneity inside themselves and the indigenous peoples away. And this happens because it reminds them of their own guilt of being lost. Their culture's gone, their language, their original languages are gone. So they carry guilt. Now, that guilt, Native people don't know. They're not familiar with that guilt or the sin or even blaming, I could say. But those three, so I'm repeating a lot of thoughts that my elders said. and they're gone now. So I'm able to do that and still remember that who said these things that I'm talking about. And with these languages that are changing from getting rid of the naturality or the nature language within English, we pick up more technical. We pick up more artificial intelligence as we risk losing intuition. And that's real, like Indigenous peoples. There's no such thing as artificial intuition, and that comes with all life. All life has that. All life does not need artificial intelligence. That comes from certain human beings, even today, that can afford to have the technology and get further and further away, as in the earth. No longer they want to be others or other people, other things than themselves. And so the language to keep indigeneity alive, those languages are involved with nature all the time. And the thoughts of like it's being uploaded. So here's the technical language, being uploaded from Earth rather than sky godded, and everything is above you while you're this little nothing. And in indigenous languages, yes, those stories of coming from other planets, those are fantasies to this society unless it's proven. So a lot of ours is hearsay language, and we hear the language they speak because they're saying it, but yet the amount of duality within the language, the binary, is what Native people here in Turtle Island described as forked tongue, because it is a forked tongue language. You can basically smile at somebody and lie at the same time. And so to have that sense of being deceived, it comes with intuition. You can sense it. And we can't get away from intuition no matter what. It's one thing that machines who are deadening that ability to be sensible with Earth, have common knowledge with Earth, or the wise people, as Western society calls the wise ones of Earth. It's more like you don't have control of Earth, first of all, and the conceptuals, they're not there because conscience is a concept, where consciousness is more intuitive. It is having to do with trees. We already knew that trees communicate. We knew that they moved. We know that the energy to pass underneath the ground. We already had that in our common language. But here comes science describing, well, there's electricity and they communicate like computers and all this. So what do we say as elders of, at least as elders of Turtle Island? It's the way the society treats its elders. They're used up. They can't function. Let's cast them aside. It's all about youth. The basically sanctioning of knowledge. So it's out there, where the other elder that I interviewed one time was Marshall. I think it's Ed Marshall from Canada, Mi'kmaq people from Nova Scotia. He said he's an 80-year-old. He's still alive in Canada. And he said we have so much knowledge and so much information. He said, I'm not saying that's not good, but at the same time, we're all hungry for wisdom. And this is where the commonality of Native peoples comes in. It's almost innate. So if I speak Lakota in Mohawk and Lenape territory, that language doesn't completely fit because it's from the land. And the description of a tree, of this type of tree, is not some tree out in South Dakota where I come from. So you have to find that language. And that's a deeper concept to one I'm working on now with other friends. Coming up probably next year, we'll be able to put it out in this foreign language of English. You see, this is where our view is, the view from the shore. All those other languages came from someplace else, and they're still in domination. trying to get rid of the original, which means they're getting rid of themselves also. So we speak a GMO'd language of English. It's GMO, and it keeps people interested because one of the capturing thoughts of it is a 3-letter word, new. Everything's new. So all this time, I have to check my educated Western mind to understand what colonialism is, the programming of language in religion, and of course, war. How do I not speak these languages? It's so easy. You just take the I, the me, the my, the mine, and basically those 4 out of speaking in English. And you look at words like the earth, but yet we'll go back and say, no, this is the way it is. It's a universal language. It's a universal language of war, poverty, all these imbalances, because that mindset that came from Europe, maybe other places, because this is my only experience is that mindset that arrived here of domination, and to always, use the earth till it's unusable, then you clean it up, but it's never going to be the cleanup, the original base. It's going to be GMO'd, which are doing to food now. They're doing to its own religion, and functions in an addictive basis, possessive basis. That's where the I, me, my, mine, and ours comes from, is domination. And so my property, my everything, and I'm at the center of it. And so you're looking at this language, applying that everywhere to everything. And you do it because, well, I want to get along and speak the languages. So a lot of people of quote unquote color kowtow to, well, we're all Americans, forget my African side, forget the original Italians, forget the indigenous side of me, forget, just keep forgetting about culture and gather under the flag of civilization. And it sure doesn't seem like a civilization today to me. It's more chaos, more something that we knew was going to happen through Hopi prophecy, to the ones that this society noted that they could stomach a little bit. But there's a lot of other native peoples not prophesying, but they're listening to their teachings, because we also went through the same greed process. And learning the lesson of what Earth is teaching is very important to all of us. And there's not imperialism involved in that statement, because Earth is important. We are important to Earth. All of us are important to Earth. We are needed. We say, displacement, thoughts and ideas and sentences and paragraphs and books. Well, if the human wasn't here, Earth would survive. How do we know that? If we're here, why aren't we making that peace with Earth rather than dominating Earth as peace on Earth? And we've tried that way for thousands of years, according to history I read, coming from Greece 2, 3, 4, 5,000 years ago. That civilization of war. And so we're so in the culture of death that our language is about something that we can't really display except through war. The grief language is not there. Behavior has been stunted. It's not a natural behavior. It relies on defying self and those peoples who don't need technology to survive, or its money systems. And that's too fundamental for a lot of, in this case, academics, because they'll come up with something to say, prove it. And out of that comes, you get into the idea of the academic people, because they're just yakking about something that they can't prove. But because it's a good old boys club, good old girls club, and it makes it easier to live because you earn more money, so you can have 2 houses or whatever that is. Or you can go to Wall Street and get lucky and all that. The idea is to become in balance, because we didn't have that poor and rich within Lakota. It's like everybody had everything, but yet Western society would call us communists or socialists. But we weren't those either. We were human beings. So when it comes down to political structures, even as I described the religions and the wars and finances, that came on a ship. And they built a structure on Turtle Island. And as the film says, with the shaman woman, who really is a shaman, she didn't go to school or a ticket or get a diploma for it. She was born into it, and an actual physical born ceremony, because her ancestors are, and that shaman are the medicine people, spiritual interpreters. So understanding the structure that is, as she said, it's not built for Native people. This structure, civilization, is not built for Native people. We're not thought of. And let's get rid of the language, because it's interrupting the flow, if that's what it is, the progress. That, oh, they need a computer. They need some money in the bank. Oh, they need a car. Oh, they need to do well. Well, we wouldn't need all of that if they left Earth alone. So you talk about sustainability. That's our languages. They want to get rid of sustainability because it's not profitable in the Western language. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you so much. There's so much that you said in there. And earlier you were talking about the word belief. And I have a mentor of mine. His name is Ilarion Merculia. He's an Unongan elder from Alaska. And in a few conversations that I had with him, I used that word, do you believe this? Or I'd say, do you believe this? Do you believe this? And he has stopped me and he said, please stop saying that. I don't believe anything. I listen and I know. And he calls it heart wisdom. And I think it's very similar to what you referred to as intuition earlier. And when I reflect on myself, when I look at my childhood, I believe that I shouldn't say I believe, I remember that I remember hearing that heart wisdom and listening to it, that intuition. And then it seems to me as I got older and was in the educational system and put in front of a TV and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, that my mind became captivated and I was unable to listen to that, or I shut it out, or the society or the world shut it out for me, that the voice, the intuition, the heart wisdom. And I kind of look at it like this, is that not too long ago in human history, we would have received our information. We would have received the wisdom that we had from our people, from our parents, our grandparents, our other relatives, from our animal relatives, from Earth. And that's been replaced by the captivated mind. And I think I've heard you say it, called it as the Western culture operates as a severed mind, I think is what you said. And I was just wondering, because that severed mind sounds to me like disconnection, which has been a heart of what we've been talking about in our class. So it seems like we're so disconnected from ourselves, from Earth, from everything. How do we reclaim that? How do we maybe even remember? You talked about folks that had drifted away from culture and whatnot. How can we remember and how can we reconnect?
Wow. There's one of those examples of extraction questions. But because of this class you're teaching, it's stop plagiarizing from Indigenous peoples. Start adapting to Earth rather than adapting Earth to our needs. I'm going to build a house because the view would be fantastic. I'm going to get a new car because it's old. It's 3 years old. It's not as shiny anymore. So here comes the new, and that doesn't mean. So if a person does off the grid thinking, what does a person who doesn't want to go off the grid thinking think actually, or do they think? They're just programmed to constantly repeat the same cycle. So the language of trying to wake up with the same language, it's impossible. So we keep repeating the programming. And part of that is, like I said, a lot of people who mimic Indigenous peoples and even claim to be part Native, they don't have the experience with it. It's, in other words, it's qualifying themselves with fractions. And it's a way of dismissing that that's a colonial act. It's like we have DOB, which is degree of blood, quantum, and that's not us as Native people. That comes from the government. And so today we're qualifying ourselves as Americans to get certain monies, and we follow the rules as I spoke of earlier, and we get in trouble. Everybody does. So we look at, is this system built for us, really? And we're all having problems with it. We never admit it. So, wow, this is an addictive system. We are addicted to a way of thinking, and that's colonial thinking. That's dogmatic thinking. That's domination. So we try to dominate everything to make ourselves comfortable. The rich are, they're more uncomfortable as uncomfortable as the poor are. So they're chasing after the same thing. One wants to be rich, the other one doesn't want to be poor. So the greed is the same. So most of my story is coming from experience and learning, watching, observing, and not so much questions to my elders, but just listening to them. It would say the purity of listening is different in a Western way, where I can explain it with English very easily, where we could go outside and listen to earth, the beautiful birds and great sunset and all of this, and give nothing, just compliments. But you think about the other way around, earth herself does not give, there's nothing that she hasn't given to us. Let's just put it that way. She gives us free air, free water, free land, free everything. And we're still not giving payment back, so to speak, just actually to earth. So we're not respecting the earth and not respecting body. We feel miserable and we exhibit that and we look for commiseration. We're all one. Let's go to this spiritual retreat. And you look at them, especially here in the county, Ulster, in New York. It's a very affluent area. And these workshops that happen, they're mostly white people. And we're afraid to say white people now. So we shorten it to Y people, like WIPO, WIPIPO, Y people. So we don't really say the word, or we're afraid to even post it on social media because we're angry if we say white people. So thinking outside the boundaries of how to be white, speaking ourselves of who we are and those original creation stories means that there does not need to be a creator because creation is creating all the time. So it's the difference between speaking a noun subjected language, noun laden language, and the one that is verbs, a relational language, a living language. So severing, as my uncle would say, the spiritual umbilical cord is the first thing. How to have a baby. You give them a bottle. Anybody who's breastfeeding, that's gross. That's still old, frightened, afraid thinking. And here comes the indigenous peoples just being who they are. And no one's being hurt. No one's being killed. And there are no rules to follow, being natural. So I guess those indigenous folks are following natural order or natural law. Now, today, there's a difference. A lot of indigenous peoples, in this case, I consider calling themselves Native Americans. It's like our story started in 1492. I don't think so. It started way before that. How do you know we started? Where was the beginning? So the Western world has taught us to ask, where do we belong? Where do we go to? Where do we begin? So it's constant digging, extracting of story, of question, of substituting endings. We want a good story, the American dream. So we're constantly parading other people without understanding ourselves. And I think part of the separation of languages, or simply, noun laden and verb based languages, like verbs, speaking in context of dimensions, spiritual, all these are because of spirit. All this because of intuition. All happens because of it. And you can go out to the reaches of the universe, wherever that is, and you work with intuition. So the energy of intuition is real, where we've misconstrued the idea of civilization, that we are modern, or making ourselves very primitive at the same time by destroying. And now, which would a common sense language would you prefer? One that takes you away from Earth and you get creature comforted, you get ear candy language, or the reality of living? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that if we really reflect on it, the answer to that question should be easy. But in this modern world, I think that many of us, we wake up and we don't know how we got here. And, we're constantly searching. And I think when you look at the current state of even just Turtle Island, the United States, you talked earlier about the words like me, I, and when you listen to, without naming any names, when you listen to certain politicians, that's what you hear is I, me, over and over and over again, and then people are internalizing it. And what I hear from my students, and when I listen to what they're feeling and what they're needing, is that despite being connected in certain ways, like you and I are able to talk across an ocean through the computer and through the internet, and we're able to host courses with people the spread out across Earth, that folks are feeling more disconnected than ever. And many of us just go through life with a captivated mind. The TV's there, and whether we're watching sporting events or captivated by the news or whatever that is, Netflix, whatever it is, that there seems to be a window there where there's some light coming in at this point, where I'm hearing and seeing and feeling more and more people that are tuning out of that and trying to tune into something different. And I don't know if we go back to remembering or reconnecting, but I think even it might be with language a little bit, is folks don't have the language to even express it. And then when you do talk about it, so many people it's kind of esoteric for them, or makes them uncomfortable, or, makes them feel funny inside, and they resist it. And, even me, I've been searching for a way, and I find myself in right here in this modern day world in 2025. And I find myself searching and trying to listen. And then I find myself trapped again and captivated. I wake up in the morning and I'm thinking, oh, I have to do this for the university, or I have to do this. And I guess what I'm trying to express is that we're feeling lost, and we're looking and we're listening, and that captivated mind continues to drown it out no matter how hard we try. But again, that there's a light and it seems hopeful. I just went to an event where they do synchronized ceremonies with Indigenous elders from all around the world. And I think those opportunities are there, but most of the country of the United States of America seem very closed off to that kind of thinking. And I don't know, where and how do we listen, and how do we find that way? Like, and for example, the courses that I teach are multicultural. So there's Indigenous students, there's um, from a variety of places in Turtle Island and Alaska and Hawaii. But there's other people as well. And I think um, we're looking for unity, we're looking for kinship, but sometimes we don't know how to find it. One way that's been positive and successful for us is just a simple talking circle where you practice the act of listening. Most of the time that you spend there, you have to listen to everybody else's experiences, to the wisdom that they bring. But other than that, it seems to just get drowned out through efficiency and through, trying to be efficient with everything. And I think, even like I said, my social work students, we feel like it's not relational anymore, or maybe it hasn't been relational in a while. And so we're not connected to the education that we're going through. We do the best that we can in, like I said, the courses that I'm talking about. But to a large degree, the system is set up for it not to be relational and to disincentivize anything that's like that. They want you to be able to measure it. They want all of that. And so I hate to use the word advice, but I'm just wondering if you have any maybe insight. For me personally, as a professor that has some power and the ability to influence students and to bring us back into something more relational. Do you have any insight on that?
Yeah, I do. Thank you for the question. So most people, maybe you too, I'm not too sure because you can't really tell on this remote system here, virtual system is we've devised so many ways to communicate that we lost the truer way to communicate. So when you talk about the talking circle, mine history goes back to before we had religious freedom, 1978, for Native people in Turtle Island. So my experience comes from that, remembering standing on a hill when I was very young in the dark as the elders had a nipi going on, which is misinterpreted as sweat lodge. So this is the distortion here, is that I they saw a car, and I lived in a country very remote. So when you saw a car, it was something. If you saw a car at nighttime and if they didn't blink their lights 2 or 3 times, you knew that that car was not somebody indigenous. My job at that time was as a protector, was to run down the hill, alarm everybody, alert everybody that there's a car that didn't blink, and they would quickly hide everything and try to act normal, especially if it was a government agent. Now, that was very early in my life, and it's kind of eased up, but I think about why did these people ban our consciousness as Native people? Really, that's what they were, because we didn't accept the religion. We didn't accept the war concepts. We didn't accept all of those things that were brought here. And then I remember the year 1978, when I was in my 20s, early 20s, is why are we allowed to grow our hair now? Why are we allowed to speak this language? Why are we did it anyway, but we did it in secret. So I wonder about the people who had, who banned us. What was there? Why, if they were free, why did they ban us from being free? If they were beautiful, why did it destroy a beautiful way? And we deny that in the Western concepts is because we didn't want anything to do with it. That was not me. My ancestors came here in a generation ago, 2 generations ago. It's not me. I didn't do any of that. Yeah. It's like saying the Constitution is for all, and at the third or fourth line or something like it says about the merciless Indian savages. And then the Constitution, or is it Declaration of Independence, it talks about accept Native people, accept Indians, accept everything. We were the exception that these equality laws applied to, and we weren't able to be accepted that way. So here comes the consciousness of Native people, even the display of the Salem witch trials. That was because of how people believed in, not how Tatuba, an indigenous person from one of the Caribbean islands, was brought to Salem as a nanny to take care of the young girls. And she came and she spent time with young girls as they learned a craft or whatever it was they were learning. She would often tell her stories about living in nature. And the young girls would go run to, after whatever, they would run to their mothers, and their mothers, who were under the influence of patriarchy. Now, this is the deal. The influence of patriarchy told their husbands, who, put these young girls through the trials as a witch, how to. There was a text out there, people may know it, is basically of how to tell who a witch is and what they do. And then once you are able to determine that they are witches, then you would kill them anyway, torture them. So this is the same law that came and was in effect at Salem, Massachusetts. And so this is the same conscience that was with that book of law called Bible or something, and that carried over to Native people 2 centuries later, 2.5 centuries later, and then it in 1880 or so they banned our languages, our cultures, because they didn't understand. Now I'm going to talk this way: is if you're sitting on a porch and you look out over a lawn, it's beautiful. There's a pond down there, and everything is just right. Then the trees are sort of encompassing everything. And you look up and there is a dark cloud coming, and it's a storm. So you're preparing for rain or whatever it is, hail, snow even. You prepare that way, the way you've been taught about weather or not taught about weather. Either you're disconnected from earth and their processes, So you hold it in one way or the other. And you don't understand the weather. You depend on the satellite or the whatever's going on there and the weather predictions or forecasts. So there is a flash, a lightning. Some people automatically fear. They fear for their lives. They fear. They're uncomfortable with nature. So that's part of the severance here. But then you wait for 2, 3, 4 seconds before there's thunder. The flash you see, and then there's thunder you hear later, a few seconds later. Well, the language you're talking about, we forgot, is in between the flash and the thunder. What does that compel this anti-nature thinking to do? Is to live in fear of nature. So that's what you see the process of happening here in our languages. They continue to process that. When someone goes out to find themselves, there is no process of living centuries, thousands of years. Not just talking 10, 20, I'm talking 200,000 years of hamblietcha, which is vision questing. And there's a certain way you do it. And that is proven, tried and. You can't do it any other way to accept, to access spirit that way, to find yourself. And even mimicking it, and your answers had nothing to do with it. Here in Turtle Island, I'm not too sure about the history in Europe or any other place, but I know the ones I've experienced is that people mimic by plant medicine, by hallucinogenics, all these ways of me spirituality. And then when the native people kind of protest, they're like, oh, they know nothing. Everybody's supposed to share. And they go into the colonialism of how we are supposed to behave and not originals. That we went in secret with being who we are, with the sun dances, with the 7 ceremonies of Lakota. Those were all hidden. This patriarchy worked. It worked well with the men. And so you see that the culture was kept by the women. And in 78, you could feel that surge. And we were feeling it before they said it's okay. We had examples of Wounded Knee, Fort Lawton, other places in the United States of that to carry us forward. Now, this present younger generation doesn't have the trauma of the generation before it or the generation before that. So they've given themselves up to the I culture, the me culture, because if you're look Indian, act like an Indian, behave like an Indian, then you must be Indian or native or indigenous. You've got the things on the wall, you're dressing in the right fashion and mode, but none of them speak the language. And even so, maybe they're tainted by the colonization or domination effects, because patriarchy worked on the men in the Lakota language, anyway, the Lakota. And so it operated the dysfunctionality of family, the severance of dysfunction of language. And so we would get down to it. Again, I'm always stressing language, the severance of who we are. So we go about mimicking, extracting, plagiarizing spirituality. The New Age came along after freedom of religion. But there's other writers that came on that freedom of religion for Native people. The American Indian Religious Freedom Act, ERFA, is that there were other writer bills with it. And one was by a white man. I've spoken with him 2 years ago, and we decided not to, talk about it or air it or at that time. And he had the experience of ayahuasca. And he woke up one day, he's like, why are all these people rich? They're all rich. There's no natives here. And he continued to see that. So I'd say he did it for 15 years. And so you're talking 1978. And the bill that he helped sponsor was one to allow ayahuasca into this country. And it rode on the coattails of indigenous peoples, using indigenous peoples to get a freedom that was taken away from us, a way to perform, to live our ceremonies. And I think when a person looks to find who they are, they'll only end up with what they are. It's this empty shell. So there's plenty of ways to acknowledge. You can do land acknowledgement, continue to do that and feel okay, but it's not real. It's like the land back. I said, land acknowledgement has to be spiritual without religion or dogma attached to it. And you look at a plant, or native plants here, we can't rename them. We must keep the spirit of its originality alive. So in other words, if you're going to go look for yourself, respect the native peoples. Don't take what little we have left. What keeps us going is our spirit and our ways with earth, living with earth and not extracting. So you have to see the differences. Because I have brown skin doesn't mean I know everything about being indigenous or being Lakota even. And we even have to know that ourselves, or I could use the indigenous in me to break into Hollywood. I can use it to get a PhD and still convey the wrong message. So we're actually making ourselves bigger than the message. And I think that's what I and me is about. It's about me. I am bigger than the message. We lost the conveyance of the message. And we seek through plant knowledge, plant everything, science, proved by war, all those things that are afflicting a great intelligence, the greater intelligence of Earth. And so those peoples who are still thinking with Earth, feeling with Earth, living with Earth are the greater intelligence, if I could say it that way, without trying to be hierarchical and saying greater. But you see, this is part of the language, relearning the language. So I really enjoy people who are thinking. Anybody can pick up a book or this and that and say, well, I informationally know, I have the knowledge of it, and you compile that of its merit-based value. But I'm really interested in how one is thinking, who's active, who's alive, who's in the moment, who's a Kantu. A Kantu is a meaning in Lakota long before English got here, meaning earth being from ancient, future, now. So we get too far in the future, we get too far in the past. That gets in the way, we're never here. We're always talking about progress while lamenting what we did. So ancestors are not in the past for us, they're in the future. We listen to the ancestor, which is Earth. Earth has been here long before, maybe even life itself, but she was alive also. And so where's our language to honor that? Where's the language in between the lightning and the thunder? We're afraid that we've lost it. Indeed, maybe so. But inherently, we feel it. So we have to deconstruct, decolonize this English to open up at least something, a crack in the system. And this acknowledge that. Says nothing is perfect. And it's time things turn around. I'm not a political person at all. It sounds political. An elder, a friend of mine who worked in Bolivia as a cultural minister, he was asked at a conference I was with, and we were sitting there ready to go, sitting under the shade of a tree, and it was very warm. And someone asked him, he says, well, are you Republican or Democrat or conservative or liberal? And he looked at the person and stayed silent for a while. It's like, how could a person come up with that question? And then he thought, okay, I'm talking to such and such. And he said, I'm neither of those. I'm not Republican or Democrat or liberal or conservative. I am indigenous. Indigenous is inclusion, relationship. And it's so. So I have a question for a friend who works in Akwesasne, who lives in Syracuse, New York. And I was going to ask him about the Constitution, the U.S. Constitution. How do Democrats and Republicans come into play? I want to ask him, is the Iroquois or the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, do they actually know, as they say, their constitution is based upon Native or Haudenosaunee characteristics, laws, or whatever that is? Has there been parties like Democrat and Republican? I haven't got the answer back yet because I saw their councils, the women were behind the men. The men were in the circle. The women were right behind the men. The clan mothers, they selected and select the leaders because it's the men who have to go out and protect. So they're honored that way, whereas men have ways of honoring the women, and even how we refer to women in Lakota fits that same story. So are we saying if we had a constitution, we would exclude white folks because those are primary signers of the Constitution? White folks are merciless killers. They're destroying Earth, the wind, the water, earth, stone, where everybody wants to live, they're destroying that way. So it's accepting. Do I feel guilty because of what Tiokasin says? I don't want to listen to him because he's angry. We're still performing colonialism where we reject Native people from telling the truth. So parts of checking our minds, am I colonized because I'm white? No, that's not what it is. Because you can see a black man, a white man, and a red man in this case as colonized. We're all affected by this same process of a virus. And what gets rid of the virus? By being natural, not trying to avoid it with drugs and, decoys or whatever. It's not a symptomatic culture that I come from. It's the root cause of living with Earth, where America itself and any other places that hold America up are actually about symptomatic symptoms. It's only on the cover because it never wants to go and deal with its own guilt, even among their own people. I say that as they because when Native people talk about they, we know who they are. Then you find the New Agers and people who want to get away from themselves say, yeah, they did that. They did that. Not responsible for it because I was born in 70. Not responsible for it because I didn't know anything about it. This is where the severance begins. Your history has a lot to do with being here now, and to honor that history. And you cannot heal the ancestors. You cannot do that because that's like trying to change history. You just have to be here now to change and break that that chain of what happened. You can find yourself back on the circle of continuum if you recognize yourself here in the present moment, and to get rid of guilt, which has a lot to do with understanding what innocence is. Every moment is innocence because we never lived here at this time. We never talked. The students never listened to this before. So everything is new in this case. And that takes innocence to understand how wide open time is, because there's no such thing as it anyway. That somebody's conception to control even the education, the programming, how long civilizations live, how long cultures live. So the more we're performing civilization, the more we kill cultures that are true to earth and sustainability.
I just want to say thank you for that. I think you've given me a lot to think about and to reflect on, and I think as well as my students. So I just want to say thank you for that. And I'm going to have to replay it and I'm going to have to listen again. I do have a few students in the chat that have just expressed some comments I wanted to share. And if anybody has any more, now would be the time to get them in. But Monica said, I appreciate this. Through our class, we've looked at a lot at changing the ways that we use language to move away from stereotypes. And Kimberly reflected, thank you for speaking about the break of language. And reflecting on the guilt I feel of not speaking my language and feeling this loss for my children, nieces, and nephews, what gives me focus and hope is learning my language now and respecting the curiosity you speak of, and of listening to the earth with respectful earnestness. Thank you, Monica and Kimberly. You have anything you want to say about that?
Yeah, the listening to earth. It's think about how earth listens to you. Are you providing everything without complaint, without expectation? That's genuine. A lot of Native people that I knew who were born in the 1800s, they had nothing, but they always gave. Always gave. That's exhibited throughout cultures, and not as a charity as civilizations do. I donated to a nonprofit. I bought a homeless person a meal. What's wrong with that? We're always looking for a definition of how not to be responsible. I have the right not to give that homeless person because he's not working. I have a right because I'm an American. So what does this country live on is rights to everything, as if everything is property, even a way to think. And for Indigenous peoples who truly know who they are, is about responsible. So Earth is responsible for us by giving us free everything from healthcare, to a unique identity in this case, to be who you are, rather than somebody telling us you have the right to be who. So we have to let go of that thinking that we're adhering to that will help us survive, exist, rather than help us to live. So the living, you can find verbs in English and look at their etymology and find it's so simple to look for verbing words that make you feel alive. For instance, if I was to describe what woman is, it's not mother. She is my mother, anything like that. So it just comes down to anthropocentric thinking, yes. And so in Lakota, we have a word called ina, but it doesn't say mother. That's the interpretation of English. So it took our meaning and put it into definition. So ina basically means for a woman, it's wia, my daughter, my mother, my grandmother, all the females in my life. So they're wia. And so we understand it that way as we means stars. Ia means earth. We ya with the closed in. We ya. We essentially means heaven on earth. And this is our meaning for what females or woman is a woman. It's heaven on earth is that to teach us respect for life like earth. Earth is heaven on earth. If we really peer down and get past our idiosyncrasies of I matter and that's the only thing, it wouldn't matter if there wasn't air or water or food. You wouldn't matter. So it's hard thinking. You need to move the spirit, not just with thinking, but actually with intuition. And I think that's a good question, by the way. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Monica added, she says she has an idea. An idea that I like to spread is to leave spaces better than you find them. The intention is to do something for us, and I mean that as all beings, not just for myself.
Yes. Bitakuye Oyasi, as the short definition of it, is all my relation. Everything is in relationship. Or even so, MC squared and more and beyond. So the center of the universe is everywhere. So there's no singularity, but we want to put everything to the single, like I have the answer and I don't. We take advice, which is nostalgia because it's somebody else's rather than individuality, where's the uniqueness that you were already given that you're born with? Have we enacted that out, or is it the programming of education, a Western process, taking that away from you? That's part of the system is to always go back to a safe language. And this happens to be English because you feel so insecure out of it. Whereas I speak Lakota and I don't feel insecure when I speak English. I can speak it freely to undo like the baptism of religion, education, unbaptize oneself, de-educate, uneducate yourself. Then the question comes from privilege. How do I do something? You want instructions or order takers. How do I do that? So you want a simple, easy gratification. So your first mouthing comes, how do I do something? It's all about you rather than just zipping up the mind and listening. If you are with Earth, you observe how she is listening. You listen to how she is listening, which brings out a purer sense of self and who you are.
Thank you for that. Well, I want to, in that running a little bit out of time, I had just a couple things I wanted to finish with. One is when I go outside, and there's obviously a lot of trees outside of the land here. And when I go out there, and sometimes different times I'm more in tune than others. When I go out there, you talked about land acknowledgments, and there's a land acknowledgement where you're acknowledging the land that you're on. But I think another way also to look at it is, am I acknowledging the land that I'm actually on with with the land, if that makes sense? And so when I go outside sometimes and I acknowledge the large tree that's out there, or the many trees, but if there's a really big one out there in our backyard, and when I acknowledge the tree, and I hate to try to avoid, like you said, trying to anthropomorphize it and all of that, but when I listen, I feel like there is something else listening to me. And when I acknowledge the tree, I feel like it acknowledges me as well, if that makes sense. And that may not make sense, but I'm just wondering if you have any insight or any thoughts on that.
Yeah. So, we go to the tall mountain to seek advice from the wise person. The tree is that wise being already knows why you're there, is willing to provide it. So it's not a silly notion. Earth is teaching you yet, but we're not willing to learn from Earth. We're willing to learn about Earth. And we could scroll it and put it in our thesis. And then we know. Then we get a piece of paper saying we know. Then they go about proclaiming, declaring, I know, but the tree is the source of that knowledge, the source of the spirituality, just like a rock would be. So, we don't even have the word for anthropocentric in our language. There's a lot of words we don't need that we're just creating mind junk with, and theory, especially creating theory to misuse our imagination. Imagination, well, as far as I know, magi is an Arabic word. It's the center of imagination. Magi is a word. It's magi is one who uses the tools of earth properly. And you're thinking, well, that rock is dumb. Doesn't have that seagull, no, that fish. It's basically dumb. That goldfish, they don't know what we know, and that's good to me. Why would they want to know what we know? How we're not using our energy in a good way. The bird is using the magic of wind, so he's a magi or she's a magi. The fish is using the water that we can't swim in, by the way. We can't live in the fire, but why are all those elementals, earth, wind, fire, and earth, within us? Separately, we can't live maybe in the air, but that we need rock to support us. You see? So all these things that we can't live in come back to imagination, not the Western way. I think that came from it, from the theory. So it's another way of thinking or being. Lokol Wichoha is a way of living, not programmed as a civilization. This is part of why they couldn't nail us down and understand our consciousness, which is, I'd say, deeper, and has many dimensions to it. In fact, if you talk with quantum physicists and even read, I have so many, how would I say, references to non-natives who have experienced what I'm talking about, from Fans Boas in the early 1900s, previously before that, not understanding our religion, our spirituality. It's out of the confines of the box I described earlier. So I think part of that listening to Earth is halfway there. But who taught you to listen is the tree. If you observe, sit quietly, and not have an opinion about it, and just get rid of the thought that you listen to Earth, it's the first step. The tree will show you how to listen. And that's why endangered peoples are this way, at the root even of everybody. See, my mom and my father, my grandmother, my grandmother used to speak why they spoke the language. They're not here anymore. But as a child, I was sitting at the kitchen table in a log cabin in South Dakota, and grandfather would speak one way, and there'd be a long pause. So as a child, everything you have to wait for, like you're impatient with everything. Wanted you to know, no, 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 I gotta know. And there was a long pause. Grandma would reply because she understood what he was saying. And then that conversation would go. One question or one thought would be because they're feeling energy. So they're conversing. And that was taught to them by listening. The earth taught them to listen. So when you're doing that with a tree, showing you how to listen. And I found out because a child, you're starting to understand what energy is about. So the silence is like the silence of the lightning and the thunder. That's where that language of Lakota exists and lives, the Lakota Wichoha. So you can go to quantum physics books, language of spirituality, not the language of religion, the language of spirituality, that many people are the same when it comes to this. They can watch with the patience in a man or a woman is to watch a rock shrink. And that's over time. But we're so caught up in being, we're so caught up in human doing as a human doing rather than a human being. So we want to get things done. At 20, 21, 22, I'm going to have my college degree. Then I'll take time out to work and go get my master's and I go get my PhD, or I'll just drive straight through and then reap the benefits of what that system provides and lose wisdom on the way and come up for reasons why one has lost the wisdom, which is really common sense to Native people, common sense. So if you understand more so, it's not that you all have to go out and learn an indigenous language. This is a part about originally who you are and not feel sorry about it. But the way we teach is you learn how to say the create. In this case, the poor thought would be the creator's name rather than saying Gaia or, that's not going to do it. It's that you have to really sink deep within yourself to understand creation, not as a God, because that mystery is always going to evade us. Even if I said mystery, I'm naming what we can't ever understand. So this is a moving language we're talking about, and one who's stagnated in their own in love with themselves language. That's why it is I, me, my, mine, and ours. So we tending to divide ourselves up, and then for the rest of our lifetimes trying to put it back together.
Thank you very much. I want to give a little invitation to close this off. But before that, I just wanted to, for one, Charlie says thank you for having and sharing the conversation today. It's been encouraging and nurturing. And Monica says thank you for spending your time with us. And I wanted to say thank you as well. And I will follow up in an email with this. But if there's any way that I could reciprocate the time that you took and the kindness that you've shown us today, I would be happy to do so, whether that's financial or whatever I can do. But I'll follow up with an email on that. So thank you very much from my heart to yours on, like I said, the kindness and the time that you've shown us today.
Yeah, yeah. I would like to be a student in your class, not listening to me, but to your other guests you have. Because I teach at Union Theological Seminary in New York, also assistant there, and these are the things we talk about. So you're right, the younger folks, if you see yourselves caught up in the technology, there is something much more important. So you're going to get to an age where you start understanding the importance of living. It becomes more important of avoiding dying. So living is on your mind, in your everything, instead of the fear of not living. So which one is killing you? So learning to live peace with earth. Our job is to have peace with earth. That's, learning anthropocentric or not, because I don't think trees are humanizing us. We tend to do that to all other life because of the language we speak. Yes, Toksha Ake watching Telo. To thank you for being here and listening to my sometimes spitefulness, who knows? But it's there. And the truth is often razor edge. And this is the way most Native people, they cut to the quick and not try to avoid sparing feelings. It's like we have to know it's easier to lie to children in this country's educational system than going right to the what they actually are learning, and that's truth. This is the way Native people are. So our language doesn't it's not frilly. So because it's living, So, but thank you for your students there. I don't see you, but thank you for listening and being here. Thank you for the class, Christian.
Thank you. And we host talking circles every Thursday. So I'll mention that in the email. If you ever want to join us, it's always an open invitation.
That would be nice. Yes,
Yeah. I'll
nice.
send-
Just to the next talking circle, if I can say, it was illegal at one time for Native people here in Turtle Island to sit in a circle. It was illegal. And think about that when you're sitting in a circle. And where's the talking stick, or if you pass it around, where does that come from? It's like getting to the layers of colonialism and just we invented it. And this is a new form. We made it better, but nothing is better. Everything is original. And if we keep GMOing our language, this language, then we're still beginning. But thank you. Just appreciate for your time.
Appreciate you. Thank you.